Yeah, there we go.
All right.
We're talking with Peter Leitch. I guess are you in New York? Where are you?
I'm in New York, yes, in the West Village.
How long have you been there?
Well, we moved to New York at the end of 1982.
Was that a big change for you in terms of your career or your life?
Well, yeah, it was a big change just in all ways, really. It was really the music that brought me to New York. Although I had been visiting New York for a good part of my life anyway. When I was first starting to play, we would come down to New York and listen to live music, and buy records because I was in Montreal, and sometimes records were hard to find.
What?
So
Where did you
go
go?
ahead.
Where did you go shopping for your records? What were your? Did you have a couple of go-to places?
Oh wow, let's see. There was a place right on Times Square, and I can't remember the name of it, but there was a radio show uh, hosted by someone named Mark Faga. Do you remember that? Does that name?
I know that name. Yeah.
Yeah, and we used to be able to get this station late at night, and this was one of his sponsors. And you would go to the store and you would tell them MF sent you, and you would get 10% off. Right? It was like very hip. And there was a place called Dayton's, which was right across the street from the Strand bookstore, which was 12th Street and Broadway. A place called Dayton's, and those are the two that come to mind.
You never went to
Oh,
Bleecker.
of course, there was the Jazz Record Center, which is now owned by a man named Fred Cohen, and it's on 26th Street, and he's still in business and doing a very good business, selling only jazz records. And at this point, it was owned by someone else. I cannot remember who owned it at this time. I'm talking about the 60s now.
Yeah.
Um, and that was a place where you could pretty much find anything you wanted.
And there, and I don't know if you're still like me. It sounds like you are. That there's just some great thrill about getting a new record, you know.
Oh, yeah, sure.
And I have to say, this is a great thrill.
Oh,
Your
thank
record.
you.
Yeah, it's two discs, which I love because that means someone's really putting it all out there, trying lots of things. It's called New Life, and it was recorded, I guess, in January before COVID really hit, right? So
Just before. In fact, we had booked some studio time to edit and mix, and we had to cancel when the big lockdown, happened. So we weren't able to mix it really for about 3 months, and then,
was that maybe a good thing because then you had a lot more time to really.
in a sense, it was. Yeah, sure, sure. But the idea of having the two discs was like it was like a programming two sets and say in a concert hall or in a club. You have different ways you could listen to it. You can listen to the one piece at a time, or you could listen to it like two sets in a club, as I say, or listen to the whole thing as a complete work, because the pieces are all kind of related in some small ways.
Yeah, and one of the things I love about the record is the arrangements are really wonderful, and it's always interesting because listening to your albums over the years, it's typically not always, but a lot of small groups, duos, trios,
Yeah.
quartets, and this is something big. It's not something you would sort of expect from someone that's been in trios. And then you have like bass trombones and you have flutes and things like that. It's just a really beautiful mix.
Well, what happened was um, I'm a cancer survivor, and in terms of the treatment I had, I lost the ability to use my left arm. So I could no longer play the guitar. And yet I was still kind of driven to create music. And the only thing I could think of was to start writing. So I did some studying and, read some books and studied some scores and started to write. And this is what it developed into.
How much writing did you do before that?
Well, nothing really more than, say, three horns in a rhythm section. Three horns, a guitar, and a rhythm section were the largest things that I'd ever written for. So this was really a kind of a challenge to do this. But it's something I'd always wanted to do, but there'd never been really a budget for it. I was working with some small, very small record labels that no longer exist the way things are now. And we just decided to go ahead and do this.
Well, it's really ambitious, and I have a lot of favorite tunes on there. I think in a lot of ways, my favorite tune is Fulton Street Suite, even though it does have a drum solo in it. I'm kidding, drummers, I'm kidding. But, that's a great piece because the way it starts out, where it goes to, I love the harmonies in it. What about that piece is special for you?
Well, I'm kind of interested in the history of New York and old New York, and that's really the oldest part of the city, and it sort of contains the oldest streets in the city, streets that go back to the time of the Dutch and the 1600s. And really the piece is about that part of New York and various things that happened there. That was the beginnings of Broadway musicals. The theaters started down there, and of course the financial district, and the old streets and the buildings, as I say. So, I've always been kind of fascinated with the history of the city.
Yeah, and when you're writing a piece like that, I'm curious, how do you compose it? Do you use the piano?
I do use the piano, yeah, because I'm able to use the fingers on my left hand. So I do work a lot from the piano.
When you had to give up
Yeah, but sometimes. Sorry?
Go ahead.
Hello?
Yeah, go ahead.
What was I saying?
You're talking about using the piano.
Yeah, using the piano. But that's funny. These pieces come together in different ways. Sometimes they'll just come together in pieces. There'll be bits and pieces of music floating around, and eventually they'll come together into a finished work. And other times a piece will just kind of write itself in a couple of hours. It's just there are many different ways that these things come together. Most of the music on this double CD, most of the music is new. A couple of the pieces are older pieces that I'd originally recorded with much smaller groups, but most of it is new.
And then you have a couple of covers at least. And I got to say, whenever I see Round Midnight on someone's release, I'm always like, okay, that's been done a lot. What are you going to do? And I got to tell you, I love the arrangement and the performance on Round Midnight. You really did something kind of fresh with it.
Well, and actually, what I did was kind of go back to the way it was originally written. So people are doing so many different things with it, and deconstructing it and changing the harmony, and there's so much of that going on. I decided I would just go back to the way that Monk wrote it and use his original harmonies. And there's a beautiful solo by Dwayne Eubanks, beautiful trumpet solo. And, you know, I just kind of approached it that way.
You know, one of the things about you talk about the soloists that there, I mean, there's a great lineup. And I'm curious, as a guitar player, you know, how you chose the guitar player for this, and did you have like really strong feelings about how he should play?
Well, no, it was actually Jed Levy, the tenor saxophonist, and he kind of helped me by being kind of a contractor. He found a lot of these music. He found this guitarist who I didn't know, and Phil, the guitarist, Phil Robson, is he's from England. He's British. He's back there now, in fact. Um, so he wasn't that well known. He's not that well known in the States. And I heard him play, and he came to a rehearsal, and I just loved the way he played. I loved his sound and the way he interpreted the music.
Do you give him any extra special instructions as a guitar player, or
Yeah, not really, not really. I just kind of like to leave the soloists open. You know, as long as he was playing the parts the way that I heard them in my head. I really try not to tell people how to play. To
and it works out?
leave a certain amount of freedom for the soloists.
Yeah. Do you ever like, as a musician, do you ever listen to like a guitar player or even someone else and go, you know, that's not how I would have done it, or, you know, I wish you would have gone here or done it like this?
Well, I mean, I did that with my own records, you know. After they were done, I'd think, why didn't I do it this way? Or, you know, like I second guess myself, which is why once I've made a record, I try not to listen to it. Or back in the day when I was making those records, that's, you know, once they were done, I would always end up second guessing myself. So I think all musicians do that.
Is there one of your previous records where you look back and go, you know, I've got pretty close? I,
Well, there's one on Reservoir called Colors and Dimensions with, you know, Jed Levy is on that, and Gary Bartz, and who else? Claudio Roditi plays trumpet. Also, there's another record on Reservoir called A Special Rapport, which was a working band with John Hicks on piano and Ray Drummond on bass and Smitty Smith. And we had worked together a lot, done a couple of tours and several recordings. And that's a record that really stands out to me.
yeah. Colors and Dimensions, one of the reasons I really love that one, and I was really thrilled that you picked that one because that's my favorite. I really like the sort of woody, almost acoustic tone of the guitar on that one. You know, you don't hear that often, and then when you do, sometimes it's not, you know.
Well, a couple of pieces on that record were played on the acoustic guitar, actually.
Oh, probably what I was hearing.
Yeah, that's sure. That's what you were hearing. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. And what about your new record's called New Life? When you look at it, are you able to go back and listen to it without that sort of that regret or?
Well, I wouldn't say regret, no, but I do listen to. There's a couple of things I would have liked to have gone back in and maybe played with the mix a little bit. But as far as the music is concerned, no, I'm pretty happy with it.
I really love that song, Portrait of Sylvia. I think that's a great piece. Maybe in a lot of ways my favorite writing on the record. What can you tell me about that one?
Well, that's one of the two pieces that is an older piece that I had originally written for my wife, and it kind of musically it kind of evolved over the years, and it was one of the pieces I decided to do with the expand the orchestration with the 14 pieces.
And and you know, when you expand to 14 pieces, you know, you said you studied some scores and things like that. What scores and what music did you look to sort of learn to do this by?
Well, two of my favorite arrangers are Tad Dameron and Gil Evans. And Tad Dameron seems to be, you can almost think of him as um, a midway point between Duke Ellington and Gil Evans. It's sort of a just a beautiful, beautiful writing. Do you know that record, The Magic Touch
Yep.
on Riverside? Beautiful. That's one of my favorite records. And I managed to get hold of a couple of Ted Dameron scores and studied them, and some Gil Evans scores also that I studied.
How long did this take? I mean, you know, from you the moment you imagined the project until it was in your hands, it must have taken a while.
Probably about 5 years.
Wow. Did you get frustrated in there, or was it all?
No, no, I was happy to be. I was having, you know, chemo treatments at the time and radiation, and was going through that stuff. So I was happy to have music to occupy me. Um, as I say, I felt driven to create music, to still create music, even though I could no longer play.
Well, I mean, you had stage 4 lung cancer and survived. That in and of itself is rather amazing.
It is. It is. I have an amazing oncologist who's just really brilliant. And he kept trying different things until he found something that worked.
And is that part of what the name of your orchestra and the name of the record?
Yes, yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
And
And what does that do to you as a composer or as a human being to come that close, you know, to the abyss?
boy, it's hard to describe, you know. It really is. Really, it's scary, you know. It's scary, and that's why I say it was so good to have music.
But then you come out the other side, even though you can't play guitar, are you just rejuvenated in some way?
Yeah, sure, sure. Um, Writing and kind of leaving space. I do miss being an in the moment improviser, which you're not as a writer, but I'm leaving space for other people to do that. So
It seems like somewhere I read or heard that you talked about one of the things, though, that you were relieved to be freed from the tyranny of the guitar.
well, yeah, in a sense of not having to practice every day just to maintain the facility. And as one ages, one has to keep that going. And also, you sort of get used to creating music that's kind of limited. You could almost say limited to what can be produced by 4 fingers on 6 strings. And one of the first things I realized when I started writing was I was no longer limited by that at all. There was a whole world of sound out there that can be created, you know, without being sort of limited to one instrument.
And what's been the reaction to this record so far? Have you gotten any reactions to it?
So far, the reactions have been very good. We've gotten several really good reviews on various internet. Yeah, I don't know whether you would call it a publication anymore, but internet, there's internet radio and internet, I don't know whether they're, what would you call them, blogs?
Websites, blogs, those kinds of things.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, and it's also recorded quite beautifully. I mean, you can really, that's one of the things with like big ensembles. Sometimes the recordings don't capture the subtleties of what's going on. And I feel like on this record, I can hear everything.
We were very lucky in that we had two great engineers. The engineer that actually did the tracking, the recording, was a man named Brian Strieber, who has a studio up in Mount Vernon, New York, which is, I don't know, it's about an hour north of the city. And the man who did the mixing and the mastering was a man named David Darlington, who just did a fantastic job, and he was just so easy to work with, and I just can't say enough about him.
Yeah. Well, I imagine, at this point, you have seen and heard so many, especially if you're living in New York in the West Village, you probably, over the years, have seen so many incredible shows. And I know that you saw Coltrane's classic quartet when you were still in Canada.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I got to ask you, and you got to see them for more than one night. Is that, as I
Yeah.
understand?
Yeah. Well, two different times.
Yeah.
Two different times.
How was that?
It was incredible. I'd never heard anything with such power and conviction, and it's just amazing. And like Coltrane, at the end of the set, he took his horn in the back, and you could hear him practicing between sets. I mean, that kind of commitment. And just a lot of an interesting thing is that I just got a reissue of the Thad Jones Mel Lewis band, and which I hadn't listened to for years. The Thad Jones Mel Lewis band, their first three recordings, which I had bought when they came out. And we had taken a trip to New York in probably 1970 or 71 and gone to the Vanguard and heard the band on a Monday night, which was it was so exciting. And the band was fairly new at that point. And Joe Henderson was subbing in the saxophone section, which was just, incredible. And I mean, the writing was a lot of it was like really over my head, but it was just so exciting. And now I'm hearing the reissue of that music and remembering what it was like to hear them live.
Why do you think you love it so much? I mean, you've dedicated your life to it. You obviously still have a big passion. How has that remained after all these years?
Who knows? It's not something I can answer easily. I've always been kind of driven to create music. And I wasn't always playing jazz, of course. In the course of making a living, I did some studio work up in Canada and various different kinds of commercial work, working with singers and a lot of stuff like that. But when I moved to New York, I kind of stopped doing that kind of work. And there were I just felt I wasn't developing the way I wanted to in Canada. And I felt I needed to be in New York. And aside from that, the fact that I've always loved the city itself. From the first time I came here, when I was about 8 years old, I came with my parents. We, on a vacation, I came to New York, and I just loved it then. The city was like filthy. It was all this energy and all this filth, and you put your hand on a side of a building and it would come across covered with black filth. And as a kid, you love that kind of stuff.
And you've chosen to remain there.
Well, I came back eventually. Yeah, 82.
Yeah. But you're still there now in the West Village, right?
Yeah, yeah. We were just fortunate enough to be in the right place at the right time when the West Village was still affordable. Whereas if we could not afford to move here now. I mean, who can? One has to be very rich. But as I say, we've been in the West Village since 1993, and at that time it was still affordable.
Well, what's next? So are you going to take a breather? You put out a double record.
Well, I don't know. There are bits and pieces of music floating around. Nothing has developed into any kind of finished work, but there are bits and pieces of music floating around, and we'll just have to see.
All right. Well, I'm looking forward to whatever's next. And Peter Leitch, it was a pleasure and an honor to talk to you.
Well, thank you very much. Thanks for having me on the show.
Yeah. We look forward to sharing the record right now.
Great. Thank you very much.
All right.